Hello, Frizzle Frontier, and Happy New Year. In 2024, I read a whole lot of books, and only 8 of them were new 5 stars, and those are the books I'm here to tell you about today. The best of the best, the cream of the crop, my favorite books of 2024. And why you should definitely read them if we have similar taste. And please do let me know what some of your favorite books of the year are, especially if we have similar taste, because I am always looking for book recommendations. So I think the way that we are going to do this list is I'm going to talk about the books chronologically, the books I found at the beginning of the year to the books I found at the end of the year, except I will be saving the best book of the year for last. Because though it is very difficult to rank this list, because like all of these books were 5 stars, awesome books, there is one that stands out above the rest as my favorite book of the year. The first 5-star book I found this year came in February with 𝐿𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻𝐿. So this is a sci-fi romance, and sci-fi romance is, by the numbers and statistics, my favorite genre, but it's so hard for me to find good sci-fi romances, or at least sci-fi romances that fit my taste, because I love it when these books have equal sci-fi and romance parts. I love the hard sci-fi, the funness of exploring those worlds, and I love the romance. And the romances, my taste tends towards slow burn, closed door, instead of the trend in general publishing with sci-fi romance right now, which is more steamy, instant spark connection kind of romances. And I found my perfect sci-fi romance here in 𝐿𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻, and I was so excited to do so. So our 2 romantic leads here, we've got one guy, and he is a playboy. He is from a political family, and he finally messes up so bad that his mom, like the president of the Space Corporation, forces him to join the Space Army. He's very upset about this, but he has to go. And when he gets to the Space Army, he's assigned a minder, who is our other lead. And this guy is very stickler for the rules. He likes organization. He likes everything in its place. And this new order to be the minder of this guy doesn't quite sit right with him. There's a lot of weird psychic shenanigans going on, and he doesn't want to remove the mental autonomy of his new partner. And so this book is a rich, slow burn of them learning to work together and learning to love each other and getting to know each other, and I ate it up. It paces its sci-fi plot so well that as soon as you get one thing resolved, there's a new conflict popping up, and it always feels so well paced in that way. And I just loved the simmering tension of seeing these 2 people want to get closer to each other and work together, but both of them feeling kind of uncomfortable about the relationship and pulling away and coming together. And that like juicy tension is just, chef's kiss, perfectly done in this book. If you are a lover of angsty, character-driven, slow burn romance and sci-fi, highly, highly recommend 𝐿𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻. I think of all the sci-fi romance that I love and I found, this one is definitely top tier. In February, I also found 2 new 5 stars with a Golden Sword and To the Bloody End, which are 2 books in the DFC Changeling trilogy. I also gave book 1 5 stars, but I read that the previous calendar year. But they're all 5-star books. So let's talk about the entire trilogy. This trilogy sits at the intersection of so many interesting things. It sits at the intersection of something that is very character-driven, where you've got awesome character relationships and conflicts and all of that simmering here, and also plot-driven, where there's a lot of action and fast-paced reversals and villains and heroes battling each other. But it also sits at interesting intersections in subgenres of fantasy and sci-fi, where you've got an urban fantasy feel to it, where it's in the big city, but there's magic. With sci-fi flares, because in this big city, there's also like advanced technology of cyborgs and all of that little cyberpunk vibe. So it's just like the perfect intersection of urban fantasy and cyberpunk, and it's very focused in this trilogy on the Fae, which is done so well, and they're so tricky and magical and entertaining. So our protagonist of this trilogy is a Fae changeling. She was the fake person left behind when a fairy stole a human child, so the human parents wouldn't notice, and her entire existence is very precarious because she's just like this fake child made out of magic. So she needs more and more and more magic to sustain her. So when she was a little kid, this evil blood magician stole her away and made her into his minion. And she really can't break away because she literally needs his magic to survive on a day-to-day basis. So now the story picks up. She's in her 20s. She is a very competent evildoer henchman, but she really doesn't want to be. And the inciting incident of this trilogy is her master, the evil magician, goes missing. So she really wants to find him because she literally needs her next dose of his magic to survive, but she also really hates him, and she's like, oh, this is kind of my chance to get free if I can find a new life to build. And as he's gone missing, a lot of his enemies come out of the woodwork and start threatening her, and she has to start dealing also with his entire empire of evil doing starting to collapse and make new friends and allies and enemies along the way. And it's just such a good series. I highly recommend. The next 5-star book I found was in March with the book that wouldn't burn. So this is a high fantasy book with little tinges of sci-fi weirdness, but mostly I'd recommend it for fantasy fans. And a lot of the entertainment value of this book is the interesting world building and the way that it's fed to you. So you get the world building in little snippets as our characters learn about the world more as they explore it. It's a very slow unfolding of what is going on, and there's plot twists along the way, pulling out the rug from under you of you thought you knew what was going on and then now not at all. So a lot of this book takes place in this infinite library. It is theoretically a collection of all knowledge ever, but right now humans are kind of in a little bit of a dark age, and a lot of the trouble is they're having a hard time exploring the library because the shelving system is complicated. So even though theoretically all the knowledge is out there, they can't really access the knowledge very easily. And that plays into one of the major themes of this book is like, what is the use of knowledge? You can use knowledge to better yourself, but what if the knowledge is dangerous? What if the knowledge is difficult to access? What if the knowledge reinforces your prejudice stereotypes because of the way you are accessing them? It's very much commenting on today's world in that way, and it's so cleverly done. So our two protagonists that are exploring this library that we're following, one comes from a very poor community, and then through a series of events, she becomes an apprentice librarian. So you get to follow her learning about the library, rising through the ranks, making friends, learning new things, and really finding a love for all of this books and reading and knowledge at her fingertips. And a lot of the plot is pushed forward by her drive to learn more and explore more in this library. On the other hand, you're following this guy, and he is trapped in the library. In one of these infinite rooms, it's been cordoned off. He has no idea where he is in the library. There's a few other people there with him that he considers his siblings, and they've been trapped in this library room for literally generations. And our protagonist there is on a quest to learn about the library around him and to get out of this prisoning room. And then of course, eventually their plots intersect in weird and interesting and fun ways. And I just absolutely gobbled up this book. I loved it. I felt like it was so well constructed. It helped me love the characters so much. I was so interested in all the world building, like A+. I did not admittedly love the sequel, so I don't know if I can wholeheartedly recommend the whole series, but definitely book one. The next 5-star favorite book I found was also in March, and that is The Goblin Emperor. And of all the books on this list, this is one of the ones that have stuck in my heart the most, and I've thought and returned to the most, and it's just like such a poignant story, but definitely not for everyone because it's so niche in its taste. Let me explain. This book is a slow, close character study. There's like next to no plot to get invested in, and the world building is dense and confusing. But if you can get on board for all of those things, it's so well done. So we are following a young man who is the son of the big elven emperor. The catch is that he is half goblin, and because of racism in this fantasy world, he is definitely seen as lower class, of less worth than the full elven-blooded counterparts. So he's grown up his whole life kind of almost banished in this backwater manor, being raised by one of his distant cousins who hates him, and he's just had a very miserable time of it. And then suddenly, all the members of the royal family that are above him in the succession line die in a tragic accident, and he becomes the emperor, the controversially goblin emperor of the Elven Kingdom. So then through the entire book, he is constantly unaware of what his emperor duties are, how he's supposed to interact at the political court, how to make friends, anything. He is just floundering and struggling for a majority of this book in his new role as emperor, really trying to do it right, trying to impress people, but really he barely knows anything about politics and is seriously having a hard time of it. And one of the things that I really admire about this book is how much it uses the tool of its dense world building to get this feeling of overwhelming confusion and feeling out of placeness across to the reader. Because our protagonist is constantly confused about what are all these court titles and who are all these new people, and you as the reader will also be confused about this thing because it doesn't go out and explain it. Our protagonist doesn't know either. And throughout the book you do start picking up on things, and I do think it's well crafted in that there's never so much confusion that you can't follow what's going on in the plot, but it is so overwhelming that it throws all of these names at you, and I think that's so effective in helping you feel the exact same overwhelm that our protagonist is feeling, and feeling that mirror of emotions makes the moments when our character and you finally do make a connection, figure something out, feel so much more impactful and powerful because you are right there with our character in this terrible situation of confusion and feeling like you can't measure up to this book. It's so well done. And I love this book so much, and now I just want to reread it. In March, I found yet another 5-star favorite, which is very different in tone and style to The Goblin Emperor, but this one is Taming Demons for Beginners. So this one is an urban fantasy. It takes place mostly in our world, except there's also demons that you can summon and make pacts with. And this book, I think at its core, is a goofy book, and I had so much fun with this ride. So our main character is a girl who's very shy and book smart, very nerdy, very trying to stay in her own shell, and she is staying with her uncle who summons demons. And right now he's got a particularly troublesome demon man in his basement. The uncle is in a long negotiation process of trying to wear down this demon in order to make a magical bargain with him. And so the demon is just currently trapped in the basement all the time. And our protagonist starts to visit him regularly, and they start to form a little bit of a bond, and then through a series of unfortunate events they end up in a bargain together, and then they go off on the run together as a unlikely team of allies. And throughout this series have their own slow burn romance. So of this 4-book series, book 1 was my favorite one, so that's why it's here on the favorites list, but I did love all of the books in the series and really appreciate their ongoing story. But this book 1 of them slowly getting to know each other, it's that slow burn romance-ness that I love so much, of people in unlikely circumstances together, forced to work together even though they don't really want to, forced to get to know each other even though they're from completely different cultures and situations, and that juicy tension of the push and pull of them wanting to befriend each other and get to know each other better, and actually pulling apart because they don't like a lot of things about each other and are confused about each other. And this book just does it all so well. Of all the books on my favorite list here, I think this one is the most easily bingeable, easily readable. And I really want to give it an extra award for that because I think that's such a rare quality to sometimes find in a book that is both really well written and also really easy to read. And this book just absolutely nailed both of those. So if that's what you're looking for in a book, highly recommend. My next 5-star favorite came in April with When Among Crows. I have a love in general for the genre of urban fantasy. There's many urban fantasy on this list, but I think this one just like totally nailed the soul of what I love about urban fantasy, where you're really combining these magical myths and legends in our world and real world grounding of visiting real places, because this book takes place in Chicago, but is also completely consumed by the magical underworld of Chicago, where you're dealing with the Polish vampires and witches of Chicago. So our main character of this incredibly paced novella is Dimitri, and he is on a quest to find Baba Yaga to ask of her a boon. And throughout the book, you get to learn more about why he's doing this quest and what the boon is, but this information is definitely paced out very carefully throughout the book, so you don't know everything at the beginning. He recruits this sort of vampire woman to help him to find Baba Yaga along the quest, and she has her own desperate reasons for needing to do this. And they started this book very much wary of each other, not sharing, and then through the trials and tribulations they encounter while searching for Baba Yaga, they slowly confide in each other and form close bonds, and with other characters they pick up along the way. And I love how, and I think one of the things that I admire most about this book is how it really paces its exposition. At the beginning of the book, you know basically nothing about these characters, and by the end of the book, you feel like you know them so well. At the beginning of the book, you know basically nothing about this magical world, and by the end, you feel like you know it so well. And the way that it gives you each crumb of information at the perfect time to keep that pacing up, to keep you from ever being confused, is just like chef's kiss. One of the best examples of that I've found this year, and I loved it so much. I love the world building, I love the characters, I love the plot. I read this book twice this year because I loved it that much to reread it immediately. Then in May, I found the Scholomance trilogy, starting with A Deadly Education, another 5-star experience. This is a young adult fantasy, and the writing style is very much first person, where our main character, Elle, is very much blabbing everything to the reader. There's a lot of almost info dumpy rambles, but I found them so entertaining because it's all pervaded by her personality. So our main character is like a wizard in training, and there are many prophecies hanging around her head that she is going to become pretty much the next Dark Lord. She has very much an affinity for evil, dark magic of mass destruction, but she's determined not to become evil. Mostly out of spite, because she doesn't want everyone who's hated her because of these prophecies to be right. And so she's fighting tooth and nail to hide her dark powers and to develop some good powers, but it doesn't come naturally to her. This entire book takes place as she is at magical wizarding school, so she's interacting with a lot of other people training to be wizards as well and trying to make alliances and friends, but it really doesn't come naturally to her because she's such a prickly person, because she's been hurt so many times in the past by people getting scared off by her dark powers and her aura of general unpleasantness that she is constantly emanating. The setting of this book is also quite interesting because the school is not a safe place. It is a very dangerous place. The death rate is very high because all of the school halls are infested in monsters and there are absolutely no teachers to be seen. All the teenagers here just have to fend for themselves and make their own education or else they will die. So then everything in the school becomes this power play because the stakes are always high life and death, even just passing your classes. And so a lot of this book is exploring the relationship, friendship dynamics between the students as they make different alliances with each other, and also exploring the classism within the school of the people from the popular, very rich wizarding families and the people from nothing, like our main character. And I just love following a prickly main character who struggles making friends and watching them slowly learn to make friends. Like, it's just the perfect character arc journey that I love watching, and it was so satisfying in these books and very entertaining plot as well. Then in November, I found another 5-star, Ninth House and its sequel, Hellbent. Here we have another urban fantasy book. This one takes place in modern day at the University of Yale. We are following a protagonist who doesn't really fit into this high elite university. She's had a very troubled and turbulent life and dropped out of high school, but she's brought into Yale anyway on this awesome scholarship because she has the ability to see ghosts. And the powerful secret societies of Yale are very interested in this ability of hers. Because these magic secret societies do a lot of creepy necromancy magic, and they need someone looking out for if they're making any terrible ghosts or having disruptions to their magic because of ghosts, and she can do this job very effectively. And book one is told with this interesting format where you have her in the present really struggling to do this job, struggling even more as there is a murder on campus that she's investigating because she's not sure if it was done by one of the secret societies and she needs to find out, even though at every turn people are blocking her from doing her job at this investigation. And it's also told in flashbacks through the eyes of her mentor. Her mentor is another student there at Yale, and he was the one who had the job before her. In the present, he is missing, and it's another part of the plot where you're trying to figure out, why is he missing? How is he missing? And how much trouble is our protagonist going to be in when everyone finds out what's going on with him? And then in the past, you get his perspective as she's coming into Yale and seeing his impressions of her as his new mentoree. And then through that dynamic of seeing them both thinking about each other and interacting with each other through these flashback sequences, a lot of the book is also about their relationship and really playing them off each other as this golden boy who really belongs at Yale, so smart, so academically successful, and her, this disaster fire girl who is trying desperately to fit in and has a lot of street smarts that he might be lacking. So I loved these books. Of all the books here on my top 10 list, they're definitely the darkest. I would give the caveat to my recommendation that they do deal with heavy subjects of sexual assault sometimes, and there's quite a bit of gore with the necromancy magic, but if that's something that you can handle to read, I would recommend these books because I did really love them. In December, I found the 5-star favorite of the Hacienda. So now that I think about it, this book is also one of the darker books on this list, though I think arguably Ninth House is the darkest. But this book is a historical horror novel. For the historical part of this book, it is set in 1820s Mexico, after a lot of political unrest resulted in the death of our protagonist's father. And this has disgraced her family, and she is desperate to find a good life for herself and for her mother, and so jumps at the chance when she gets a little bit suspicious, but it's okay, marriage proposal. And so she becomes the wife of this wealthy man who has an estate, an hacienda, out in the countryside. It's beautiful. She gets to be the mistress of this beautiful hacienda. What could go wrong? Well, the hacienda is haunted. And so the main plot of this book is her trying to understand and cleanse her new home because she is so determined to build a wonderful new home for herself. But the more she pushes this house and explores it, the more it pushes back. We also get throughout this book the perspective of a priest that she enlists to help exorcise this house, and he has his own interesting past because he comes from a family of witches. So he's dealing with both the religious responsibilities that he takes very seriously, that he cares a lot about his Catholic role as a priest, and he cares a lot about his role as a helpful witch. And he has to use both of those responsibilities as he's trying to interact with this haunted house. And then throughout the book, you also get a very angsty, forbidden romance flirtation between them, which I ate up. Looking back, I think what I admire most about this book is how it perfectly crafts the desperation feeling in its characters and in the reader. You have the creepy haunted house that is trying to kill our main characters and is escalating over and over throughout this book, but you also have the characters being more and more desperate with their internal quests. With our heroine really wrestling with how much does she care about making this new home for herself, when is it right to give up and run back to her mother, or is she going to stay her course and really fight for this thing that she believes should be hers. And you also have with our hero of the witch priest really wrestling with how much is it okay to use his witch powers when the priestly side of himself really shouldn't be doing that kind of thing anyway, but what is the greater good here if he needs to use his witchy powers in order to fight the haunted house? And all of that juicy internal conflict is just stretched out in the perfect way. The tone is perfectly haunted house gothic. Ambiance of 1820s Mexico is delicious, and if you're looking for a historical horror novel that's not that scary and has beautiful internal conflict, I highly recommend The Hacienda. So now I have one more book to tell you about my favorite top book of the year. But first, let me give very quick honorable mentions to some of my 5-star rereads. So these aren't new favorites, but they are favorites that I read this year. Rereading. We have all 4 books of the Raven Cycle, 2 books by my favorite author Emma Bull, Finder and Falcon, Komar, one of my favorite sci-fi romances, and The Scorpio Races. I highly recommend all of these. They definitely held up on a reread. So now we have come to my top favorite book of the year. I read it in August, and now, can you guess what it's going to be? And you might think, just based on the list of favorite books I've given so far in this video, that guessing my favorite book of the year is an impossible task. But Books and Lala did it. And I'm going to link this video in the footnotes for you to watch because it is a beautiful video where she was doing a challenge where she was guessing what someone's favorite book of the year was based on the rest of their top 10 books list was. And yeah, it's iconic, and I was so happy to be featured. It was so cool. But you, someone who might have been watching my channel all year, will have an extra advantage with guessing my favorite book because it's the last of my 5 stars of the year that I haven't yet talked about here, and that is Piranesi. So Piranesi is a short, weird book that utterly entranced me, and I fell in love with it. Obviously, it's my top book of the year. A lot of the fun of this book is putting together what is happening, what is going on as you read it. So much of the mystery is, what is this place and what is real? And so to describe the plot of this book in any real detail is to spoil the book. But I can give you a little bit of teasers, and if it sounds intriguing, I highly recommend go and pick it up because I loved it. So throughout this book, you are reading the journals of our protagonist named Piranesi. He is trapped in an infinite labyrinth of rooms. And all of these rooms are filled with marble statues. He's on a quest to catalog every statue in the place, and he loves his job, he loves his home, it's all fine and dandy. Until as he explores his home, he finds not all is as it seems, and everything is not quite fine and dandy. Here's a few little examples of things you find out about his home near the beginning of the book that really helped me get hooked into this narrative style. For example, he tells you that there have only been 15 people existing in the world to his knowledge. There's him, the one other mysterious guy who is also trapped in this labyrinth with him, and they meet twice a week to discuss their discoveries about the labyrinth, and the other 13 skeletons that he's found along in his travels. He's a very dutiful journaler. He takes great pleasure in documenting everything he finds and sees. His journals go back farther than he can even remember into his past, like a whole 7 years. And his journals start out being numbered and dated in like 2011. And the current him has no idea what the year 2011 means or why he would ever date his journal that way. And there begins the adventure of following Piranesi. I think one of the things that really worked for me in this book that isn't going to work for everyone, but you'll know pretty quick if it works for you, is the very close journal format, where he uses his own interesting vocabulary, where he capitalizes like every 4th word in a sentence, just based on how important he feels the word is, that it's a very rambly, close to reader style that I absolutely ate up and loved. And I loved this book so completely. I read it in 24 hours, and then the next day I was like, I love that so much, and I read it again 2 times in 48 hours because I just loved this book so much, and now I just want to go reread it because it's just so well crafted. It's such an interesting journey of someone going from this state of curiosity and innocence and then discovering more about the world as that innocence is expunged. So those are my top books of 2024. Please let me know in the comments, what are some of your favorite reads? And stay tuned for the future videos from me, because I am so excited to make my statistics of my reading for 2024, especially because a few books on my top 10 here, like Piranesi and When Among Crows, broke some statistic trends about my reading that I thought were very stable, and it turns out are not as stable as I thought. So tune in for my stats video very soon to learn all about that.